Good evening and thanks for being here on a Monday. I'm Lauren Maloney. First at 6, sadly for the second week in a row, people are remembering the life of a longtime Vermont senator who died over the weekend. Dick Sears was 81 when he passed away Saturday at Albany Medical Center. ABC 22's Matt Holderman spoke with a few of Sears' close friends and colleagues in the State House and beyond. He now joins us live in the studio with more on what they had to say. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Lauren. Well, similar to Senator Dick Mazza, who died 2 Saturdays ago, people describe Dick Sears as a good friend and someone who really cared about his constituents. One of his colleagues was even with him during his final moments over the weekend and says Sears was always optimistic and thinking about the future until the very end.
I was very, very lucky to have him in my life.
For more than 30 years, Senator Dick Sears of Bennington showed up to work at the Vermont State House, not wanting to play the game of partisan politics. Instead, he kept his constituents at the forefront.
He looked at each issue and asked himself, what kind of impact would this have on Vermonters?
That's according to his district mate of 10 years, State Senator Brian Campion, who says for him, Sears was a mentor, a coworker, and a close friend.
Even those nights after a crazy day, we would sometimes I'd pick up takeout on the way home and we'd turn on MASH and laugh.
Campion was with Sears in Albany when he died over the weekend and says up until his last day, Sears was busy thinking about re-election and getting back to work at the State House for another 2-year term.
I think it was Thursday, he asked me to bring over a strawberry shake from McDonald's and a roast beef sandwich from Subway. And when I got there, he was ready for those, and we had a great conversation, and we were still talking about the future. And that's how I'll always remember Dick Sears, as somebody never giving up.
He always looked out for the little people, what I call the little people that can't help themselves.
State Senator Bobby Starr, who worked with Sears all 32 years he was in the legislature, describes Sears as a good friend too, and one of the only senators willing to vote against the grain with him on certain occasions.
I think a couple of times him and I were the only two that voted certain way as Democrats on bills, because he was kind of a moderate.
Starr says one of the main things he'll remember about Sears was his dedication to helping justice-involved youth, leading the charge on Vermont's Raise the Age law and justice reinvestment.
Very pleasant to work with, knew a lot about kids that would get into trouble. It's going to take a pretty good sized pair of shoes to somebody to fill or his.
And another very notable part of state history that Sears had a hand in was the legalization of civil unions. Sears helped Vermont become the first state to pass that same-sex legislation back in 2000, and Vermont later became the 4th state to legalize same-sex marriage in 2009. Campion says Sears should be remembered as not only the most effective or one of the most effective legislators in Vermont, but one of the most effective state legislators in the United States. Live in the studio, Matt Holderman, ABC 22 News.